hit the bill again, and then we'll start over some amendments.
Sure. This legislation prohibits a health plan from requiring a patient with stage 4 advanced metastatic cancer to undergo step therapy if the use of the approved drug is consistent with the best practices for the treatment of stage 4 advanced metastatic cancer. There's a procedure that is mandated in some cases that patients go through what's called step therapy. Another word for it is fail first. I don't think that fail first is what you would want if yourself or your mother or your wife had advanced metastatic breast cancer. I actually have a lady who was going to appear today, but her blood counts were too low, meaning that her white blood cells were too low, and if she came here, she would likely be very susceptible to an infection. So I'm just I think you have a printout of this testimony, and I just have a few little sentences that I've highlighted. I want you to understand what it's like to have metastatic breast cancer. In 2007, for my 36th birthday, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I had boys who were only 12, 9, and 7 years old, and that was just her 3 older boys. In 2011, walked into an after-hours clinic. She had the breast cancer, and then a couple of years later, 4 years later, walked into an after-hours clinic for what seemed to be a sinus infection, and found out that she had tumors located throughout her skull, one on her spine and another on her pelvic bone. One of the tumors was so large that it almost took up most of the right side of my head. The cancer was literally eating through my skull. After 5 years of 1 or 2 PET scans a year, my insurance company said no more. We did pass a bill for that last year because that has been a protocol that's not acceptable. The tumor had eaten almost all. Then it follows up. The tumor has eaten through her femur bone now. So they put her back on PET scans every 4 months. The insurance protocol for breast cancer is eye to thigh. So every single time she has to appeal to have the scan include the top of her head to at least her knee, since that's actually where the cancer was. So just kind of showing that some of these protocols, you can't have a protocol and have it blindly apply to every human being that gets something. It's going to often, there are going to be individual differences. When I lie down on the steel table, I remind them that it is from the top of my head to at least my knees. We do the same song and dance. Breast cancer is eye to thigh. Please look at my chart. Well, I saw that, but insurance only allows breast cancer eye to thigh. And she has bone metastatic. I have tumors in the top of my head and my femur. Recently, because of a PET scan, they found 2 new significant sized tumors growing in a lower femur. At this time, the doctor thought it would be best for me to add oral chemo and change my aromatase. I don't know the word.
Aromatase.
Thank you. Inhibitor. The insurance denied that. When the staff called, it was denied because insurance protocol was set for a particular inhibitor that had to be taken with the oral chemo. The thing is, that inhibitor was the one I was already on, the one that had failed, causing me to have 2 new tumors. It took over 2 weeks and 5 appeals from my doctor to get to speak to someone that would listen. Letters of proof that the inhibitor would not work, my chart, my history, and yet it was repeated over and over that in order for me to receive the oral chemo, I had to take the inhibitor. That was the protocol for the insurance. Once my doctor was able to do a peer-to-peer, the other doctor agreed that it would be senseless for me to take a drug that had already failed once. I was thankful to my doctor, but imagine how can he and his team spend hours and hours fighting insurance companies when he could be seeing more patients and saving more lives? And then it even goes further that the doctor tried to order the medicine, but it had to come from a pharmacy in the north part of the state. Although the local hospital has it on hand, I will need to wait longer. The nurse called back a little later to tell me she had done some research and found a coupon A coupon for a free month of my medication, and because it didn't have to go through insurance, I could start tomorrow. How can the drug that I need be right in front of me at a local hospital, and the insurance company can decide that I can't have it because it didn't come from the pharmacy that they use? When I finally received my prescription in the mail, I was almost finished with the first cycle of the free drugs. Imagine all those tumors. Now, when I read this, I'm going to be honest, it scares the living daylights out of me. Because at any moment, you find out that this is your fate again. It's that fast. You don't know. You go in 1 minute and life is perfect. 2 minutes later, you find out that this is what you're dealing with. You don't have time to wait for all of these processes and to go through treatments in order from the cheapest to the most possibly effective. Now, I will say that I do feel a tinge of remorse to read it like this, because the insurance companies have been willing to work with us on this, and I really do appreciate it. I also have someone that would like to testify on the bill, but we might want to do that amendment.
Now, I know you have an amendment, and I know the health plans have an amendment. Do you want to? You just want to do your?
I think there's just one amendment.
Okay. Okay. Well, then we'll go with that. Ms. Cannon, on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is Amendment Set 1770-1770. It's been distributed to the committee. It's also available online under House Bill 370, Amendment Set 1770, consisting of 7 amendments. Amendments number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all technical. Amendment number 5, the first part will change the criteria that the prescribed drug or drug regimen has to meet in order to qualify for this exemption. So it'll have to meet one of the following. One, that the prescribed drug or drug regimen has the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved indication, or 2, the prescribed drug or drug regimen has the National Comprehensive Cancer Network Drugs and Biologics Compendium indication, or number 3, the prescribed drug or drug regimen is supported by peer-reviewed evidence-based medical literature. Amendment number 5 also would add new language to require healthcare providers to provide notice to the insurance company that the condition is associated with stage 4 advanced metastatic cancer when requesting the exemption and authorization to prescribe. Amendment number 6 is technical, and amendment number 7 adds a definition for associated conditions, which means the symptoms or side effects associated with stage 4 advanced metastatic cancer or its treatment.
Thank you, Ms. Cannon. Representative Stokes, you want to expound on the amendment? Or?
This amendment was reached when we were trying to find a point of negotiation between the insurance companies and the Komen Foundation, who we've authored the bill for.
Okay. Does anyone have a question on the amendment? Would you like to add anything to the discussion on the amendment? I know you're at the table.
Not on the amendment at this time.
Okay. I'll make the motion to adopt the amendment. Is there any objection to the adoption of the amendment? Seeing no objection, the amendment is adopted. Ms. Stokes, I'm glad you read that letter, and it's deja vu to me. My father had cancer 6 times. He beat it every time. So he's passed away now, but that was from natural causes. But
That's awesome.
He had enough chemo to kill a horse.
Right.
But it is, and I'm glad that the insurance companies are working with you. I know they. It's a lot of times they get cast as the villain, but if we don't have affordable insurance, then none of us are insured.
That's right.
Representative Abraham, did you have? We'll wait later on. You're going to wait later on? Okay. You wanted the board is clear. Would you like your guest to testify?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, just introduce yourself and who you represent.
Yes, thank you. My name is Angela Miller, and I'm Executive Director of Susan G. Komen, Louisiana. We cover 56 of the state's 64 parishes, and I'm here representing not only Komen, Louisiana, but our sister affiliate, Komen, New Orleans. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on House Bill 370, which precludes an insurance policy for requiring a person with metastatic cancer to undergo step therapy protocols. if the use of the above of the approved drug is consented with best practices for treatment of stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. Once again, my name is Angela Miller. I am a resident of Iberville Parish, and today I'm here to speak on behalf of those Komen affiliates. We believe patients and their physicians should be free to make treatment decisions based on what is best for the patient. And step therapy, also referred to as fail first, requires a patient to first try a preferred, often generic alternative to a drug prior to receiving coverage of the originally prescribed drug. Step therapy is a method of utilization of management that healthcare plans employ to control costs by beginning treatment, sometimes with cheaper therapies, and then progressing to a newer, more costly treatment. According to the study published by the American Journal of Managed Care, step therapy may create barriers for members to receive medication and ultimately result in higher medical utilization costs. These protocols should optimize affordable, effective, and appropriate access to care and not lead to delayed treatment, poorer patient outcomes, and increased medical costs. Currently in the U.S., more than 154,000 people are living with metastatic breast cancer. Metastatic breast cancer is an advanced stage breast cancer where tumors have spread to other parts of the body. It is estimated that nearly 42,000 breast cancer deaths will be a result this year. Although metastatic breast cancer cannot be cured, it can be treated, and treatment is highly personalized and must be based on decisions made by the patient and their caregiver, their provider, as they are most capable of determining the appropriate treatment for patients. Most metastatic breast cancer patients suffer from a number of conditions associated with the disease. Since the cancer has spread to other parts of the body, it is imperative to treat comorbidities, side effects, and symptoms of the cancer. Weakening bone, central nervous system, tissue, edema, pain, etc. Unfortunately, most step therapy protocols rely on generalized information regarding patients and their treatment, as opposed to considering unique patient experiences and responses to different treatments. To date, Susan G. Komen has provided over $166 million in research and owned 400 research grants and over 40 clinical trials focused specifically on metastatic breast cancer. Its research has resulted in better understanding of breast cancer and improvements in both quality of life and survival rates, ensuring patients are able to receive more consistent and effective treatment in even greater situations when treating patients with potentially life-ending diseases such as metastatic breast cancer. Patients and physicians should have the opportunity to choose the best treatment and therapies without burdening and being overly concerned about the cost of containment policies. As a committed partner in the fight against breast cancer, we know how deeply important it is that all cancer patients have a fair and equal access to treatment that may save their life, or at least help them remain with their family for a longer period of time. And I just want to follow back up with Kelly's statement, where Kelly tells us that today her son is 12 years old, and she is asking you to help her see her son drive and go on his first date and maybe one day get married.
And I actually didn't read that sentence because when I read it to myself, it made me cry.
Yes,
So
it is hard to read. But we do have Cassie Dean who with us today, who is metastatic stage 4. She's sitting right behind me. She's willing to speak with you. And Cassie, I have to say this is so important to her that she came straight from chemotherapy to be here.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I'm a little teared up.
That's okay.
Actually, excuse me, Kelly is a dear friend of mine. I met her through the metastatic breast cancer group, and she's younger than me, which is really sad. My name's Cassandra Dean. I've been living with metastatic breast cancer for the last 5 years. And if it weren't for the treatments that I'm able to receive, I wouldn't be here. My kids are now 12 and 16. They were, the first time I was diagnosed, they were babies, 3. And my son was less than a year old the first time before I became metastatic. But I've been metastatic for the past 5 years. So these treatments will allow us to be with our families longer. And I know, like in Kelly's case, having to deal with insurance companies not being able to get to the treatment she needs has been tough. And I hope that, and they've been very good to me, but in the future I hope they continue to be good for me. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank you. You did just fine.
I know, I was teared up.
The board is clear. Do we have any amendments pending? Just that one. We passed that amendment already, though. Okay. I think he's going to wait on his. Let's read some of the cards in support. These are all present but do not wish to speak. Dr. Montiek Sizer, Ann Steer from the National Association of Social Workers, Gabriella Keys from Mary Bird Perkins, Kevin Hayes. These are all in support but do not wish to speak. We do have opposition to the bill. So, I'm sorry, Representative Seaball.
I have just a general question for Representative Stokes. I just pulled up and looked and saw that there was no fiscal note. Do you know if a fiscal note has been requested?
No, we didn't. I don't think we requested any of the fiscal notes. They gave us fiscal notes on the other two. I don't know why they didn't on this one.
I guess as I read this, it looks like a new mandate. And anytime there's a new mandate of coverage, the state is obligated to pay the increased premium. So I think there's got to be a cost to the state if we pass this. Would you agree?
I'm looking over y'all's shoulder at my legislative assistant, but I know that. Wait. That was unrelated. Sorry. We can certainly request a fiscal note.
I would be more comfortable with a fiscal note. So, I mean, we know that there is going to be a cost to the state. I have no idea what it's going to be. And I would be a little uncomfortable moving forward with the bill without knowing that. So if we could maybe finish the debate here and get the fiscal note before we do anything with this.
Yeah, I'm kind of, and I would defer a little bit to the chairman about whether or not, how far out that'll put us if we wait another week.
What I would suggest we do is, I would go forward with the bill. We can request a fiscal note after the committee hearing.
Okay.
And if there is, if there's going to be a fiscal note, I believe it's going to have to go through, probably get recommitted to appropriations.
Good point. Okay.
I would rather do this now and not wait till next week.
Good.
This is a 60-day session. I think we go out June 8th or June 7th or something like that.
Fast.
So that's what I would recommend.
Perfect.
We do.
Okay.
But
That's all right.
that's going to be up to the pleasure of the committee, obviously. But
Right.
but to committee members, yes, there will be a fiscal note requested. There's going to have to be. So, and you want to get that out of the way now because you don't want to get jammed up later. So,
I don't know why we didn't get it. I do remember being told that we were trying to make sure we had them for all the bills, and I don't know.
Well, let's just do that. Okay.
Thanks.
So, we do have opposition. So I'm going to read those cards, and I know Kenny Lacoste from Blue Cross is in opposition and does like to speak. So if y'all want to give up the table, and we'll let them come up. We also have Daryl Cahoon from Aetna that is present, but these are all in opposition. Present, but does not wish to speak. Jeff Jaraza, present and will provide information if requested. Corey Harvey, Vice President of Blue Cross Blue Shield, present, provided, and will provide information if requested. And Jeff Jaraza is representing Louisiana Association of Health Plans. Rodney Braxton is present but does not wish to speak. Blue Cross Blue Shield. David Laverne, Blue Cross Blue Shield. But you are going to come to the table. Okay.
Are those red cards as well?
They are. They are. So, gentlemen, why don't y'all come on up and state your opposition.
Y'all crafted the language.
Mr. Laverne, you want to go first? Just introduce your name and who you represent.
Yes, sir. David Laverne with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Louisiana. And I have here with me Kenny Lacoste, who's a pharmacist with us at Blue Cross as well, and certainly reluctant to get up here and oppose Representative Stokes and some of the testimony that you heard. I had a mother who passed away from breast cancer in 1993, so certainly something that hits us all. And we worked with Representative Stokes. We had numerous meetings and numerous discussions with her, and she accepted most of the amendments that we proposed to her. There was one, though, that we couldn't quite to come to an agreement on, and I think the staff may have that language. And our biggest concern has to do with the broadness and the potential drugs that would be required to cover here that could be extremely expensive and that kind of thing, where there may be a comparable drug that isn't nearly as expensive. So that's what we're trying to capture here in this amendment. We're referencing the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines, categories of evidence and consensus or the categories of preference. That's a national standard. My understanding is that's a consortium of all the cancer experts throughout the country. It includes MD Anderson, Johns Hopkins, St. Jude's, Mayo, all the big experts in cancer treatment. So what we're hoping to do is include some language there where the drugs that as long as the drugs that we're covering are recommended by that consortium, that we would be okay using the step therapy. Like I said, I've got Kenny Lacoste here who's going to talk a little further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to explain our opposition to this bill and to give an example as to why we do the things that we do when it comes to step therapy, particularly as it relates to this bill. First, let me say that it currently is, and it always has been, the position of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana to extend the best and most affordable care possible to members who are battling cancer, as well as to all members who trust us to pay for their health care. I, too, have experience with stage 4 metastatic diseases. I'm sure almost everyone in this room probably has as well. My father had metastatic lung cancer, so I know that it often leaves patients very vulnerable. And I'm sure if you've had a close friend, you know the same thing I'm talking about. And while it's an awful process and an awful disease to talk about, there are some bright things out there on the horizon and some positive notes. For instance, in the last 10 years, the FDA approvals for drugs that are aimed at treating cancers represent over 50% of the drug, close to 50% of the drugs that have been that have made it to market. So there are a lot of drugs that have made it to market in the past few years, and many, many more to come. The technology that we're sitting on the brink of right now for new therapies that are coming to market, I mean, exponentially growing in terms of the things that they can do, extending the life expectancy of patients, sometimes even curing cancers. Unfortunately, these drugs, while they may change the genetic makeup of the disease itself and represent cures, they also come with hefty price tags. Some of them you've probably heard of in the news lately. Drug therapies for cancer that can cost upwards of $500,000, close to $1 million for treatment. We at Blue Cross want to make these available to those who need them, but we have to also be fiscally responsible and find ways to support and pay for these expensive treatments. And one of the things that we do, particularly as it relates to this bill, is we try to limit the use or limit the first-line use of drugs that cost exceptionally more but don't do anything more for the treatment of the disease. And I'll give you a specific example and some of the reasons and the history in the pharmaceutical industry of why we develop step therapies for these types of treatments. So as drugs reach the end of their product life and begin to lose patent, we'll find that there are some members in the pharmaceutical industry who will target these drugs and develop a knockoff. Well, they'll take the same chemical entity, reformulate it, perhaps put it into a different architecture in the pill to make it a little more extended release or some version of it, get it approved, give it a new name, submit a new drug application to the FDA, and charge 2 and 3 times more than the current therapy for this, only as a means of extending its product life. And the example that I brought to you today is a drug that's actually for the treatment of metastatic prostate cancer, Zytiga. Zytiga cost about $10,000 a month for treatment. It has now reached the end of its patent life, and we see a generic on the horizon. But during this process, another manufacturer has come along and taken that same formulation of the generic form of Zytiga, crushed it up and micronized it into a new formulation. It's exactly the same drug, submitted to the FDA, did not have to prove efficacy, only prove that it's the same drug as Zytiga. Yet rather than charging $10,000, they charge $20,000. So we look at that as a drug that costs more but does not do anything more in terms of the treatment of the disease. So that's a case where we would want to have the ability to say, no, we don't want to pay for a $20,000 drug when a $10,000 drug does exactly the same thing and is supported by evidence from NCCN, supported by evidence from the FDA. So that's an example of why we oppose this legislation. I think if you look hypothetically at in 2018, if we took all of the patients and members at Blue Cross who were on Zytiga and swapped out that new drug, Yansa, it didn't mention its name, we would have looked at an additional $4 million in excessive spending that would have gone to, to the policyholders, to the Louisiana businesses that pay for health care for their employees. That's $4 million that would have gone to could have gone to the treatment or the payment of some of the more expensive cancer therapies that are on the horizon. So just in closing, we oppose this because we feel it really doesn't do much to protect patients, and in the long run actually ends up increasing the burden on patients, on their families, on Louisiana citizens, and the Louisiana businesses that end up paying for their employees' health care. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any members have a question? Representative Abraham?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a prostate cancer survivor myself, I understand all what's going on fairly well. Is it my understanding that in layman's terms, I would like to offer the amendment that says you can use generic drugs in place of a specific drug. So I'm prepared to offer that amendment. With that amendment being offered, what position would you have on this bill now?
We wouldn't oppose it.
Okay. At the proper time, I'd like to, I think it's been distributed, I'd like to propose this amendment that in layman's terms, again, allows generic drugs to be used instead of a specific drug.
Okay, let's see if, does anybody have any questions before we take up the amendment? And Representative Stokes, why don't you go to the table, and if you want to, I'm sure we all want to hear what your opinion is on this amendment as well, but, okay, Molly, can you hand? Ms. Cannon, why don't you read the amendment in?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is Amendment Set 1228. It has been distributed. It's also available online under House Bill 370. It's Amendment Set 1228, consisting of 5 amendments. Amendments number 1, 2, and 3 are technical. Amendment number 4, the first portion is going to be actually the new language. Paragraph 3 under Amendment 4 is they already previously adopted in the previous amendment the requirement that the treating physician inform the health insurer that the prescription is for an associated condition. And Amendment number 5 is that same definition that was also previously adopted. So the new language in Amendment 4 would provide that the prohibition would not apply if the health insurance's preferred drug or drug regimen is considered an equivalent option for therapy or a higher ranked evidence-based option for therapy as compared to the prescribed drug or drug regimen according to the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines, categories of evidence and consensus, or the categories of preference.
Thank you. Any questions on the amendment? Seeing no questions, Representative Stokes, do you need a minute to look at it, or?
Well, thank you, Chairman. What I see here is that in section, if we're talking about that, the amendment handles almost like a generic situation where the drugs are chemically identical, and we've talked about a good bit, trying to figure out a way to say virtually identical, but there seems to be maybe a little glitch in that it doesn't refer to the same National Comprehensive Cancer Network Drugs and Biologics Compendium. It refers to the National Comprehensive Cancer Network Guidelines, categories of evidence, and consensus, or the categories of preference. And I think that that particular document, from my understanding, contains provisions that allow you to go based strictly on cost. And I just want to make sure that this isn't a little bit of a double.
And I'll be honest with the committee. I can't say I'm 100% sure. We presented this language to Representative Stokes, and she came back, and we kind of went back and forth for a while. My understanding is the language that would be in this amendment is specific to the compendium and this group's recommendations for the treatment of cancer and which drugs are effective. That's my understanding. Where the language that you had provided was broader and wasn't specific to recommendations for the treatment. Now, I'll make the caveat that I don't totally understand this, but that's what I was told by our people.
Okay. So Representative Stokes, tell us what, if you object, I'm sure if we move forward, you'll work with them and they'll work with you. I'd hope between now and the floor. I know you're a very reasonable person, so that would be something you could do, but
Absolutely.
It's your call whether you want to.
I would like to defer to the Komen representative for just a minute.
Okay,
if she
that's
can
fine.
speak.
You can speak on
and
the
I don't
amendment.
know what's coming.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to make this plain. I'm a patient advocate. Okay, these gentlemen over here are much more learned than I am regarding these matters, and so, but we have some assistance from our Komen headquarters, and as in reference to the bill, it says there is no prohibition for generics in the current bill. And then it says the NCCN categories of evidence and preferences say affordability, which defeats the purpose of the bill.
Okay.
So we'd like to work further, but at this point in
Yeah,
time, I
yeah.
think we need to work further.
And my understanding again is that this group consists of all the leading cancer experts throughout the country, and it's their recommendations that this references to as to what drugs would be the right drugs to use to treat cancer. So, we'd prefer that this amendment go in.
And so here I find myself just a little CPA legislator girl
Nobody believes that.
trying to figure out, So I'm just having to act on faith based on what both sides
Okay.
say.
Representative Jordan has a question real quick.
I guess I don't have a problem with the amendment in concept, but frankly, I'm a little bit confused because I'm hearing two different things. So if the amendment is to say that you can use a generic that's virtually identical or basically treats the same and there's no difference, and if that's the position of Mr. Laverne and Blue Cross, then I understand that. I guess the only issue I have is it seems as if Representative Abraham, I think he's trying to achieve that same goal, but I'm hearing that his amendment does not exactly achieve that goal, but defeats it. So I guess I just need some clarity on that. And if nobody here at the table is able to provide that clarity, do we have somebody else who can provide that?
Yeah, what about
Thank
Mr.
you.
Lacoste?
Mr. Lacoste, if you want to come up and give us your opinion on the amendment.
I'll take a stab at it.
Can you get through?
Zig or zag?
So I'll take a stab at it from the perspective of what I know about the NCCN. NCCN develops treatment guidelines. So, for instance, if you have prostate cancer and it's metastasized to certain spots, so they may have a treatment guideline that says you start with drug A, and add on drug B, add on drug C, and so I hate to use the term recipe, but sometimes that's often the way that those treatment guidelines are considered. And if you go to any one of those particular member hospitals with a particular cancer, they're going to treat you based on their treatment guidelines that they've established. And again, I would defer to those treatment centers because they know far more about this than I do, but they include the centers like Mayo Clinic, MD Anderson, Johns Hopkins, et cetera, Shands, they're the experts and they develop the protocol. So if they say a protocol says this is what it should be, that's what we adhere to. That's how we would develop our guidelines to fit the NCCN treatment guidelines. We wouldn't say that you have to use a drug where the NCCN does not agree with that. We would say that it would have to fit their treatment protocols.
Okay. I'll just speak for myself. I'm in favor of the bill. If the amendment wants to stay on, that's fine. But we find out between here and the floor that the amendment is defeating the purpose of the bill, I'll go to the floor to strip that amendment or to rewrite it. But that's just my personal opinion. I think this is so over all of our heads. I don't know if there's anyone in this audience that's going to be able to come up here and give me any confidence one way or the other. I appreciate what Representative Abraham is trying to do because I know genetics are a lot cheaper. Big Pharma will tell you that drugs only consist of 10% on every dollar spent on medical care. Find that very hard to believe. But I've had my own fights on drug transparency, which up to this point I've not been successful, but that's okay. Representative Jordan, do you want to add anything else? You got your button on?
Yeah, I do. So I guess the main question, and again, I may be using these terms incorrectly, but if the NCCN looks at affordability regardless of efficacy, then I guess that's what I'm trying, because you're saying they look at affordability, and if it looks just at affordability and regardless of which one is more efficient or
I can't speak to that because I don't know what they, where they
all right,
plug
so
affordability into their algorithm, if you will. But I would say that they would probably look at efficacy first and foremost as clinicians.
that's fine. Well, look, and in light of what the chairman has stated, I don't have any objections. Just
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor by Representative Abraham for an amendment. Representative Stokes, do you want to make an on-record thumbs up or thumbs down? Or
I will say yes. Let's go ahead and do
Okay.
the amendment. And I remember the kind words of our chairman.
Okay, so there's Representative Abraham's made a motion to adopt the amendment. Is there any objection to the adoption of the amendment? Seeing no objection, the amendment is adopted. Are there any more amendments, Ms. Cannon? There are no. The board is clear. Would you like to close?
Only to say thank you. And look, even though there's a little bit of confusion right now, everyone has really worked together to bring this to fruition. And I'm sure that we'll be able to clear it up between here and the floor. I think it's good legislation that can save lives and save you a whole lot of heartache if you ever have a loved one that's in this situation.
Well, if I can quote Nancy Pelosi, we got to pass it to find out what's in it.
Oh, well. Thank you.
Probably done that before. All right, so I will make a motion to move favorable HB 370 report with amendments. Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, House Bill 370 is reported with amendments.